Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about how to improve sibling relationships despite anxiety and OCD. And I say despite because sometimes anxiety and OCD makes it even harder for our kids to get along and develop a solid relationship. We're going to be talking about what to do when our kids are aggressive, what to do when our kids are struggling, when we're not focusing on them or they feel like we're not focusing on them, and just how to strengthen sibling relationships in general, even regardless of anxiety and OCD. Like any other relationship, sibling relationships need to be worked on. They need to be fostered. And like anything else that's going on in our home, we have our role to do and our kids have their role to do. And sometimes we overstep and we get in the lane of our kids, and sometimes we don't get in the lane, in our own lane and do the things that maybe we can do to facilitate a better relationship. And so I have invited Dr. Corinna Tucker onto the show. She is the director of the Sibling Aggression and Abuse Research and Advocacy Initiative, known as SAARA, and that is located at the Crimes Against Children's Research Center. She's a professor emerita at the Human Development and Family Studies at the University of New Hampshire. Her primary research interests include sibling relationships, parenting, and mental health. She has a particular interest in sibling aggression and abuse experiences across the lifespan. Dr. Tucker has conducted research and published extensively on sibling relationships for over 25 years. So she is definitely the person to talk about when we're talking about how to build that connection between our kids and have them grow into adult relationships that are strong. I know that's one of my main fears. I'm always like, I want my kids to love each other when they get older. Do you worry about that? And I'm always looking at their relationships and I'm always wanting to foster them. And sometimes we don't know exactly what we need to do or say to help foster those relationships in a productive way. I feel like sometimes we force sibling connection and then our kids actually get more resentful of each other. I was actually just talking to my daughter yesterday and I feel like they had this loving moment. I share it in the podcast episode. And I was like just so taken away that they had this like really loving, compassionate moment, which made me feel like, oh my gosh, all those seeds that I'm planting, like one little sprout just popped out of the dirt and it made me feel really happy. But it made me feel like maybe I need to foster more connection. And I kind of got greedy about it maybe. And I was thinking we need to sit down and have dinner together. It's just the three of us now that my husband's passed away and my older daughter is in college. And it's annoying. We all kind of do our own thing when it comes to meals, partly because of my son's ARFID with his restrictive eating. But so eating can be a little bit of a stressor. But I said to my daughter, do you think we should all just sit down and have dinner? And she's like, no, that's a terrible idea. And I'm sure if I asked my son, I didn't ask him because I was like, okay, she's nixed it right there. But sometimes I think that false or that like just facilitating this artificial connection doesn't land well when we're just trying to force it. But how do we create like authentic connections? That's what we're going to be talking about. That's one of many things we're going to be talking about today with Dr. Tucker. So stay tuned for that. Before we get into this episode, I would like to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the U.S. and outside the U.S. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is a right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That's treatmyocd.com, and I'll leave a link in the show notes as well. So without further ado, here is my interview with Dr. Tucker. Oh, well, I want to welcome Dr. Corinna Tucker to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, it's great to have an expert and researcher on siblings. There's so much to unpack related to our relationships with our siblings in general. But I wonder if you can just introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about your work.
Yeah, sure. So I have been studying siblings for a couple of decades, really since I was in graduate school. And I recently retired from my position as a professor at the University of New Hampshire and have moved over to becoming the director of what I a shortened version is SAARA, but it's the Sibling Aggression and Abuse Research and Advocacy Initiative. Um, I've always studied siblings. I started out talking about the important role, or my work focused on the important role of siblings in our lives in terms of our well-being and such. I focused on the support that they can provide, how they enhance children and adolescents and emerging adulthood's lives. And then I've also moved over to studying sibling conflict and then more recently about aggression and abuse.
Yeah, and all such great topics. Are you a sibling? Do you have siblings?
Yes, I do, and I do have three children.
Okay. It's just interesting. I wonder what got you into that work. That's just fascinating topic.
I was very fortunate to, in graduate school, to work with some of the first researchers on siblings, and one, Dr. Judy Dunn, she was considered the quote mother of siblings. And then I've also worked and had the fortune to work with Susan McHale, Dr. Susan McHale at Penn State. So, and it just went from there.
Yeah, great work to do because siblings do have such a huge impact. So I wonder if we can start with the benefit of sibling relationships and then move into how do we foster those things as parents.
Absolutely. So in the US, about 80% of children do have a sibling. So many of us, it's almost a universal experience, have a sibling. Or even maybe if it's not a biological sibling, it could be a very close relative or cousin or someone in that child's life who plays that role. So I'm talking about all kinds of siblings here. Um, Siblings are very important to our well-being all across the lifespan, and there's a number of reasons why, but three primary ones why siblings are so important to our well-being. One is that the everyday contact we typically have. So they're in our lives. Many times they live in the same home with you, or at least part of the week. And so there's a lot of contact there. There's also a uniqueness to siblings in that they have an emotional tone to this relationship, unlike other relationships. So they can be the best friends in the world, companions, someone that you've never laughed so hard with in your life. And then on the other hand, they could be, someone who you just see red and you've never felt so angry in your life either. So, and then the other piece is that there is this connection that's almost involuntary in nature. So if you happen to get upset at a friend, you could move on from that friendship, but there's this connection that we have with siblings. So they are a very unique relationship, and they're one of the longest relationships that an individual can have in their lifetime, longer than the one that you have even with your parents. And so they're around and they can be a real source of support and companionship across the lifespan.
Yeah. And I mean that's what it's funny because my mom always would say you're always going to have your brother and your sisters. She would always kind of put this like almost burden on us where like you're always going to have they're going to be the most important people in your life. And it's funny because now I hear myself repeating that to my kids, but with a little bit more of a nuanced tone where I'll say, you may not like each other right now, but you might you might have best friends, you might even have partners that come and go, but your siblings typically are there forever. And it's true. It's like the longest relationship for most of us with a 50% divorce rate. I mean, I've got three siblings and I've watched each one of them divorce and remarry and go through different tragedies. And the common denominator though is the sibling. Our parents are gone. They're deceased, but it's the sibling connection. And I do feel like a lot of people listening to this worry, and I get this too, when our kids aren't close, because I think sometimes we're so close to it and we forget the bigger picture that there's different seasons and chapters in siblings' lives. I know I look at my two little ones who, are in a season of hating each other most of the time. And I know a lot of parents, especially those raising kids with anxiety and OCD, where there's this extra layer of struggle, they worry about that sibling relationship and how it's going to be impacted. So before we go deep into kind of a little bit of that area, I wonder in general, like what are some things parents can do to foster a healthy sibling relationship?
Yeah, I mean, so, you've touched on this a little bit that it is something that it's a worthwhile endeavor for parents to help promote or encourage a close, positive sibling relationship. It is, especially if they're going to have to work together maybe to take care of you when you get older.
Right.
Right? Yeah. So, and in families where there's maybe one child that has some challenges, and parents may worry about favoritism and issues like that. So it's very important to first to really value that relationship and help build it between the two children. And the ways that you can do that is really first not labeling your children as this is my smart one, or this is my sporto, or anything like that, because that creates division, and it can create resentment between children. And so it's important to value each child for who they are, spend time with each child, but then also create opportunities for children to work together and have time together. And if they are getting along and they are working well together, you want to notice that. You want to praise them for getting along. Look how well you guys are working together. I really like that you're sharing. What a great idea to play a game of Uno together. Anything like that, just to encourage them to have that time. And if there are concerns around favoritism, or being treated unfairly, to listen to children when, their perceptions really are what matters there, even though you may not think it's unfair, but to listen to them and to really work at treating children fairly. In some cases, it may make sense that one child receives more attention sometimes than the other. But that communicating to that, that is the case, is very helpful in terms of seeing things as fair. But if in that case, it's still important to spend time with the child who's not feeling like they're getting the time and the attention that they need. So all those things can help. I think also another opportunity to encourage a positive sibling relationship is if there's a disagreement or a conflict. This is an important time to encourage them to connect and strengthen that relationship. A lot of times, what happens in sibling conflict is a parent may feel like they need to come in and settle it.
Mhm.
They may feel like they need to referee it and maybe protect one child from the other, or go with the younger sibling, or because they're younger, or go and help the child who they think needs some help. And that really doesn't send the message that they support the sibling relationship. You really want to help the siblings work with one another. And so when siblings are fighting, it's important to see this as an opportunity to teach them how to get along and to build their relationship so they trust one another and they can work together. So teaching basic social emotional skills like stopping and listening and taking turns in listening, those kinds of skills are important for conflict management, moving forward in a conflict to resolve it. And it's just good pro-social skills that will strengthen not only their relationship, but it will strengthen the interpersonal skills of each of your children.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. I was having flashbacks of when my kids were younger. So right now they're 13, 15, and 21. So one is at college. But when they were younger, they would play together. And that kind of leads me to my next question because they don't play together, 13 and 15 anymore. But they would argue all the time. And they would come to me and I would be like the mediator. And I don't even remember what I used to say. It was something like come to Judge Natasha or something, like they come, and then it was like, okay, like, and there were like ground rules. It was like, okay, he's going to tell his story. and we're not going to interrupt him. And then you're going to tell your story. We're not going to interrupt you. And then normally, like, both of them added to the problem. Like, oh, he took your toy, but then you hit him in the head, you know. And so there was like some awareness of both. I mean, and it takes a lot of bandwidth, I think, as a parent to be able to do that, to take the time. But then I would start hearing them do it themselves and not even come to me because they learned how to listen to each other, how to respect each other. And I do think that it's so easy for us to swoop in and either, when I was young, it was like we all got in trouble or we all got hit. Like there was no like mediating, there was nothing. Or we
Or the
sweep in.
parent that would make the judgment of like one was in the wrong and you have to apologize. And
Yeah,
it usually left the other one angry and resentful
right.
is a pretty common pattern.
Yeah. And then it like worsens the relationship because you're like,
That's
well,
right.
you always get away with it. And it's interesting as my daughter is getting older, and she's the baby, she's starting to disclose, I feel really bad because I would tell on you, predominantly to her dad, and you would get in trouble. And a lot of times I saw that and I would make up things to get you in trouble. And he would always take my side. And just that awareness and that guilt, I think that she's carrying of like that she contributed to maybe a bad relationship with her brother's relationship with the dad because he would immediately like take her side. And so I think parents being aware of that and the impact it does to the relationship is so important.
You're so right. I mean, relationships and families aren't isolated. We're all connected,
Yeah.
And so you make a good point there that not only was, the quality of the sibling relationship affected, but the parent-child relationship also was affected. And also what happened is kids probably took different roles in your family. Maybe she was more the angel and he wasn't, seen that way of the family. So yes, it's really important. And it's so common that parents will come in and just settle it, thinking they're doing the right thing, but they're actually not giving siblings the opportunity to work together. And I love what you said is that, you set ground rules, and we recommend that parents do set ground rules when trying to really act as a mediator, a third party who's neutral, which is important, and facilitate the siblings working together. So, okay, we're going to have some rules. Everyone's going to listen. We're going to take turns. And you're right, it does take some effort up front. It's best to do this when children are younger and learning these skills, developing friendships, learning about other people, and developing these cognitive skills as well. But as you rightly point out, what happens over time is if you put this time in, not that you can't do it when they're older, but if you put this time in when they're younger, they eventually acquire these skills, acquire these interpersonal skills, and then they start doing them independently. And the research has shown that these skills that they gain while during, managing disagreements and conflicts with a sibling actually spill over to their friendships. It spills over to their romantic relationships, and even in adulthood, it spills over to workplace relationships as well. And we've just recently put out a Psychology Today post saying, adults, you're having trouble in your romantic relationships. Well, it may be due to your sibling relationship. And yeah, because this is where you learn to manage disagreements in a sibling relationship. This is where you learn with a peer. It's different fighting with a parent. There's different dynamics involved. But with a peer, or a sibling, that's where you learn to fight more with an equal
Yeah.
and learn to listen and take turns and figure out how to compromise and how to negotiate and build some of these, what you're talking about, this empathy that you have for another. Absolutely.
And I know a lot of the families that listening, the sibling relationship has gotten strained because of the anxiety and OCD. And I do see that in my own family as well, where, my son was very dysregulated, very aggressive, ADHD diagnosis down the road and anxiety and OCD. And, I couldn't leave him alone when she was a baby because he would hurt her. They're 2 years apart. So he was a toddler or like preschooler, but just so aggressive. And then unfortunately, as he progressed, and this is a story, I say this, I'm saying this story because I know that it's almost universal for a lot of the families that are listening. Um, he became, he like targeted her through his aggression. So when he would rage, or was having an OCD meltdown or just a dysregulation, even if she had nothing to do with it and she was sitting in a corner, he would go after her, like a punching bag. And now that they're older, he's more regulated, more controlled. He doesn't go after her, but I still see that she goes to the bedroom and locks the door the minute he starts to throw pillows. And she's talked about needing to hide and how scary it was when we would leave the house and the older sister was in charge, but didn't have full control over the house. And she talks about it being a trauma for her that she's processing in therapy. And that really makes it hard for them to connect, I think, on some level, because she's carrying a lot of this resentment. And that is kind of the almost the norm, I think, in our families when we're raising kids with anxiety and OCD, that there's outright aggression. Sometimes the parents are so consumed with the child that has the mental health issue. And sometimes anxiety or OCD hijacks the whole family. And how
Mm.
do we work on fostering or repairing even, I guess, relationships when there has been that kind of history?
Yeah, I mean, I think a whole family approach is really important and one that explores each sibling's experience. So it's not just maybe your sons and your younger daughter, it's all three, because maybe the older sister has witnessed things, which definitely can be impactful as well. So it may be a therapeutic approach that includes the whole family and having some shared understandings about what took place and, just addressing safety concerns and really supporting families and building up the strengths, particularly of the parents, and their abilities to support each of their children and then the relationships amongst everybody. And, trauma-informed care, I think, is something that can be very helpful. They've shown different therapeutic strategies like EMDR and ART and such have been useful for those children who have come up in terms of child abuse and child maltreatment. There is some suggestion that those kinds of approaches could be helpful for children who have been traumatized by a sibling as well. I think working with families to find their strengths and what people and working through maybe with individuals, but then also with different relationships within the family is a good approach in
Yeah.
that
And I think
case.
a lot of times as parents, you know, parents have so much on their plate that they do forget the impact that it does have on siblings, and that a mental health struggle is a family affair, and that
Hmm.
there's no one who's not touched or impacted by that dynamic, and that the other kids are just as important as the identified child with a mental health disorder, because they're having their own lived experience and they're being impacted just as much. And so yeah, I think that's really important sometimes to get some ancillary therapy or EMDR therapy or family therapy to address it.
Sometimes also parent education is very helpful because what's unique about the sibling relationship is parents' views of what is our norms in the US around what is acceptable behavior between siblings is pretty wide ranging. Some families have, no hitting rule or no aggression at all, psychological, physical, whatever, none. Where others may say, oh, it's just a scuffle. They're just roughhousing. It's just boys being boys. Or an older sister would never do that to a younger brother. And I think parent education, I mean, one of the things that we're doing at SAARA is trying to change these norms and this perception that aggressive behavior is the same as rivalry, and it's not, or that some of these, quite frankly, aggressive or even abusive behaviors, although may seem minor, are actually can be quite trauma-inducing for the other siblings, whether it's happening to themselves or they're witnessing them. And so, if these same behaviors were taking place between maybe romantic partners or peers, it might be treated differently and taken more seriously. And so, what I'm suggesting is what happens between siblings should be taken just as seriously as some of these same exact behaviors taking place between peers or romantic partners.
Yeah, I think that is such a good point, because that behavior isn't going to disappear just because now they're moving past the sibling and they're moving into a peer relationship. I mean, or a partner relationship. And even making them aware of that. I know with my kids, if they hit, we'll talk about how that would, that would be assault if you just hit somebody, at the grocery store, or if you think it's okay to hit your sister, then you're going to think it's okay to hit your partner. And we have to work on these skills now so that when you are dysregulated, your first thing isn't to lash out and hit. And I think also working with the sibling, that it's not okay for people to hit you, and giving that. I know I grew up, now this is my therapy session, but I grew up in the 70s and I don't know if part of it was just kind of the cultural norm and the 70s, and part of it might have just been my family, but hitting and getting aggressive was just part of growing up. It's okay. I mean, my sister and I would get into like really aggressive violence altercations, and my parents were aggressive, and it was just that aggressiveness was just normalized. And I think for our it's kind of, I think our intuition is to just jump in and tell our kids he doesn't mean it, he's really dysregulated, he's got anxiety and OCD, or he's got ADHD and he's going through a hard time, I'm sorry that you got hit. And I really feel like it's important to convey that message of pausing and validating, like, it is not okay for anyone to hit you, whether it's your
Right.
brother, your uncle,
That's
me,
right.
a friend, a
That's
partner.
right.
Like, that's where the education starts, so that cycle can be disrupted, and they're not going to find a partner who hits them and they think, people who love me hit me. That's part of it.
I mean, that's what we're hearing from those who've been harmed by their siblings, that sometimes there's sort of this family atmosphere of aggression, or that, oh, it's hard for parents to think about one child harming another, particularly if they're family members. That's very hard. And a lot of times parents aren't sure what to do. So sometimes the responses aren't quite effective in managing this. And it's feels terrible as a parent when you see your children hurting each other, or one child hurting. And you want to make it better. It's a very important point. What you're saying is that you don't want to give the message that, violence is okay, or aggression's okay, or, well, there's always an excuse for it, or it's not someone's fault. And I think we've heard from survivors of this that sometimes that's been upsetting for them to have heard. And so it's important that, again, underlining that when children are aggressive with their sibling, that really isn't, that is demonstrating that there are some conflict management skills to be learned, that there are some communication skills to be learned, there's some regulation skills that need to be learned. So, and, parents can model some of these self-regulation techniques of remaining calm, taking a break, and gathering oneself, and demonstrating listening skills, empathy, perspective taking, those kinds of things, modeling that so that the family atmosphere is one of emotion regulation, and that we listen to one another and we don't hit. That's a rule in our family. There's no hitting. And so it does start with parents demonstrating that. And, it is hard to think about, but it's important for those children who are harmed to feel validated, like you said. That's very important. And that parents work with their children on with using child-centered techniques of, maybe there might be an apology, or how can you work together, or how are you two going to solve this? And one of the greatest things is the siblings solving the problem together, and then actually enacting the solution. And then as a parent, you can praise them. So when that happens, when the siblings actually solve it together, the parent isn't solving it for them. The parent isn't a referee. They're not favoring one child. It brings the siblings together. It strengthens them. Like, oh, we can work together. You listened to me. You valued what I said. You cared about me, and I can trust you. That really means a lot and goes a long way.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
And I wonder what happens when they're not able to do that. What does a parent do when, and I'm thinking about a child with anxiety or OCD or an angry teen with anxiety and OCD, and they're targeting their sibling, maybe not aggressively, but that person's contaminated, or they can't touch any of that person's stuff, and the family can't go out of the house because they're all trapped, and it's really impacting the sibling. How do you help that relationship when maybe the person with anxiety or OCD wants nothing to do with their sibling, or vice versa? Sometimes it's the other way around, that the sibling is just so frustrated and angry and they don't want to hear about it anymore, as far as why this is happening.
For families where it hasn't gotten to this point, I think prevention is really important. And that goes back to seeing any sort of conflict, anything disagreement, promoting a positive sibling relationship right from the start, and working with them and some of these social emotional skills. In terms of where, if it's gotten to this extreme where they can't be in the same room, everyone feels trapped, I would say that family is probably needing, some help, some external help, probably. If having kids take a break and kind of pulling together so they can, taking 20 minutes to kind of get physiologically back in a better space in order to work together. If that's not possible, I would suggest there's probably possibly some parent education that's needed, or some therapeutic help that a pediatrician or someone can help with. We also have information at our website, the SAARA website, that can help. But that's why I think it's so important to start in the preventative of wait a minute, let's take a break. Things are kind of getting out of hand. Let's just all work together here. And I think when you encourage your kids to work together, the attention is on both children and supporting both of them. I think in the case where, your brother or sister has OCD, they can't help it. It feels like all the attention is on one child. Mm-hmm. And that creates some of the dynamics that you had spoken about earlier.
Yeah. And I think getting them involved earlier, because you're talking a lot about proactive stuff, and it's never too late, but
no,
ideally,
not even as adults.
Right. But, involving them in treatment, involving them in maybe a therapy session with the anxiety or OCD therapist, doing family sessions. I mean, when I was in practice, I would do sibling sessions, just the sibling or just the sibling and my client, just so that we can process things. And I think that that's just as important as doing the therapy for the anxiety and OCD, because it's really impacting the family dynamic, or even taking your child out one-on-one and letting them vent. I think sometimes, and I know I'm guilty of this too, you want to jump in and excuse the child or explain the child. And there might be a time where you just have to do a one-on-one and just completely let them vent and you just validate it. You're right. I know this is hard. It's hard for me too. And that's not fair for you. It's not fair that you felt like you had to hide, or it's not fair you had to. I know a code word was really helpful for us too. Obviously, she's still using it even without me saying the code word, because she's hypersensitive, I think, to those cues of aggression. And so she's been well trained to go into a room and lock the door. That was on purpose initially. It was, I'm going to say a code word so that you can be safe and you could be tucked away and you're not a target while I deal with this dysregulation. And I think parents arming themselves with some concrete tools when it's a little out of control to prevent some more further damage can be really important.
And I think also the point of that, this is not something that they're going to grow out of. A lot of times people will think, oh, you know, parents will give the message, oh, you'll be the best of friends when you're an adult.
Yeah.
Not if it's like this, not typically. You know what I mean? This is where the relationship is really formed. It's not saying it can't change as an adult, but I think that's an important piece. And, I think also, what you're saying, and I'm so thrilled to hear that you would have sibling sessions, is that you valued the sibling relationship and that you didn't dismiss this as something, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just rivalry. They'll get over it. There's more to this relationship, and it is one that you want to take care with. And it does matter if children are perceiving things as unfair. They've actually shown in research that it's that unfairness piece is really what can drive the resentment and the troubles with well-being. It's not jealousy, it's the
Yeah.
unfairness.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I wonder what you can do about that if it's like a skewed perspective, like, and I'm just thinking about my own kids as we talk about this, my oldest, and I think this might be a birth order issue that you might see that's common, where the oldest thinks the youngest is babied. And there's a big gap between them, I think 8 years. And you would think there would be some coddling and some like motherly, but no, that's not happening. But just this, you always baby her, or she always gets this attention, and objectively not seeing that. But then how do parents address those maybe birth order dynamics or these perceptions that might even be skewed?
Yeah, so what they've found is it's not what the parent perceives, it's really what the child perceives is what matters. Even though you may not see it, it's that perception. So that's where it's really important to listen to that, like have a one-on-one conversation. And it sounds like it's being said maybe in group, like the whole family's around, or maybe the two sisters are around one another. I think having a conversation with your oldest about it and trying to understand about what her concerns were and are they still ongoing. And then it may be that the younger sister also has noticed this too, and she may have her own concerns. So it may be that the two of them then talk and understand about what is not fair, and understanding about treating children equitably or fairly is not always the same as equal.
Right.
And it may be that each of them needs some perspective on why you made the choices that you did, and they may make sense. And once they hear it, they may not view it so negatively anymore, or it may be you hear something that you weren't aware of that just needs an adjustment. But having that openness, having those conversations about learning about one another, and empathizing as a firstborn, as a later born, as a parent, can be really healing to all of you.
Yeah. I think there's so much meat in the one-on-one opportunities. Like when you meet with your child alone and they have the space to be able to articulate their perceptions, and you have the space to kind of tell them your perspective or even just validate how they're feeling. I think that it's so much more powerful than when you're meeting or you're talking as a family. It's just sometimes there's a different discussion when it's isolated.
And I think also facilitating the two siblings talking, again, giving them an opportunity to build and strengthen their relationship. Know that they have one another, and you're not you can be neutral and helping, but you're not the one managing their relationship. I mean, there is work that shows once parents pass on, sometimes the sibling relationship is only managed through the parents. So once parents pass on, that relationship falls off. And so it's important to have, and look, siblings get busy with their lives in their 30s and their 40s, but then when parents get older, they have to kind of come back together. And those old issues that were part of their relationship when they were children sometimes pop up. So it's nice to have it nice and strong so that later in life it doesn't fall off and that they can work together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I wonder, how much should a parent facilitate those siblings talking or doing things together? How much do we push that and how much do we let that happen organically?
Yeah, I think it's sort of like a watchful eye, so going back to earlier where you said about, you were teaching your children, you were the mediator, and then eventually they kind of took off on their own. And so I have these distinct memories of my children. I taught them to do these sort of mediation techniques of listening and compromising and such. And I have this distinct memory of standing in my laundry room and hearing a disagreement about to happen and just sort of walking and listening. And then, okay, they're managing. Oh, okay. Oh, that sounds a little, should I go? No, they got it. And then just staying out of it and letting them go. And that, I mean, it doesn't mean that it's been perfect ever since that point. There have been times, when they've gotten older where we've had to sit down and work some more emerging adult issues out and things like that in their relationship because their relationship evolves and changes too, as they do. Certainly, in terms of encouraging their relationship when they're younger, even if you're at a family event or you're all going on a family hike, if the siblings go off forward and they're kind of caught up in chatting, let them go or encourage them to help one another if you're going fishing with them or, have them have that space, not always having to make it parent plus them. You can stand with that watchful eye back and say, "Oh, I think your brother's looking for this. Sister, did you realize this?" And then let them take it. And then praising them when they do that. So, yeah, I think that will come. Parents will see it.
Yeah. I think it's important to catch those moments. And then you have some beautiful moments. I think if you're doing this, it may be ugly in the moment or like in this chapter, but I know the other day my son got into the car and he was having a hard time and he was just exploding and venting. And then he said, "I'm sorry," to my daughter who was in the back seat, that you have to hear this or that I'm, going on about this, which is awareness because we've talked a lot in the past about how his previous behaviors when he was younger impacted her, and that's why, she's having this response to him. And it was just the best moment. It's like one of those, like, you're going to have maybe 5 of these in your life where my daughter was like, "Don't worry, I love you. And you can talk about this." And I have like never heard her say, "I love you" in an authentic, organic way like that.
It's
And so,
fabulous. And I think, it really shows it's wonderful all the work that you've done, but I think it's also important. It's not just the management of the conflict, but it's that resolution. Like we worked together, we got to this goal, we did it together. No matter what project or relationship, I mean, that always feels great, right? When you actually get there and you have that success and sort of bask in that and cherish that, and like, wow, great, you guys, that's super. I love the listening. I love that, that happened. And I think supporting all that, that's just a wonderful moment that you talked
yeah,
about. Yeah.
yeah. And there's like silver linings, I think, when you're dealing with a rough chapter. And so,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
knowing that it's ever evolving and that the relationship can ebb and flow. I know with my own siblings, there were like decades where we were not connected. And then a crisis or something, normally a crisis, would happen in one of our lives and it would bring us all back together. And my mom was right, full circle,
Yeah.
that we have each other. And it does take work. It's not just a given that you're going to be close to your siblings in adulthood. But it also doesn't mean that just because they're having a really nasty chapter in this current season of anxiety and OCD, that's going to be their relationship forever.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And like those little moments, take them as wins, and on another day or another moment when things aren't going so great between them, you can say, "Remember that day?" And it might just, kind of trigger them to be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that day." And maybe I need to acknowledge my sister here, or maybe I need to say to my brother, "It's okay. I'm here with you." You know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, where can people find more about you and your work? It sounds fascinating.
Oh, thank you. So we are at the University of New Hampshire, and we are an initiative at what we call the CCRC, the Crimes Against Children Research Center. So we're SAARA, and you can look us up, and myself, and there's two other people that are at SAARA with me. Dr. David Finkelhor, who is long history of work on a child maltreatment. And then also Dr. Tanya Whitworth, who is a research scientist at SAARA. And we put out a Psychology Today blog about every 6 weeks on different topics related to siblings. And then we also have bulletins and caregiver tip sheets on a variety of topics related to siblings. And we also pop up on podcasts like yours, and we give talks and trainings and are at conferences. So feel free to reach out. We do have Instagram, we have Facebook, and we have LinkedIn sites, so people can follow us there too.
All right, that's wonderful. I will leave all those links in the show notes where people can find you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I hope that you found that interesting. I feel like sibling dynamics in general is a fascinating topic. And I love the fact that there's research going on just for that, because it is one of the most powerful relationships we can have on this planet. Whether it's good or it's bad, they can be really powerful. And learning what we can do to support our kids develop healthy relationships with each other and from there, their peers or their partners is what we want. It's really important. So I will leave a link in the show notes for Dr. Tucker's information. You can follow her on Instagram at SAARA Initiative, and that's SAARA, so 2 A's in the SAARA Initiative. And you can find her work there. That's a great place to start. You can also check out her website at unh.edu/CCRC/SAARA, SAARA, and check that out. Also, they have a blog on Psychology Today called The Science Behind Siblings. And I will leave a link in the show notes for that as well, because that's actually a really cool place to digest some information in an easy sort of format. So I'll leave all those links in the show notes, and I hope that you find the sparkle in everything you do, and I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.